Just to remind folks where we were, when you look back at the House E&A committee that met in February, we had a recommendation that came out of the E&A committee for interim study, and that vote did come out of the House unanimously, and then it did go on the House floor as a voice vote for interim study. And we did feel that it was important for us to take another look here at it, ask some questions, and hear from folks who had stakeholder input. Thank you. So with that, I will look to either one of my two colleagues here to also ask any questions should they have any. Great. So for the author of the bill, Representative Partial, if you wouldn't mind coming up and, for the record, just stating your name.
Yes, I'm Lucius Partial, representing Marlborough and Troy currently.
Thank you. Representative, I have had the chance to take a look at pieces of legislation that are germane, that are either in the process or are continuing to work through the legislatures in other neighboring states. And I am curious to know sort of how the formation of the charge of the commission was formed. And so if you could speak to that. I noticed that you have 2 members of the House, a member of the Senate, and a member of DES, 1 member of Northeast Resource Recovery Association, a member of the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and a member of Northeast Recycling Council. Do you have any other thoughts about the composition of that proposed commission?
Not necessarily, although I think that we should have all interested stakeholders present. And if there were advocates for other systems beyond extended producer responsibility, perhaps their voices should be heard.
Thank you. Are you aware of other sorts of commissions that do or do not include producer stakeholders? So that's one entity that I was noticing that was perhaps not named directly in the charge of the commission, and I didn't know if that was intentional or if that is, if you had thoughts as to why that was the way it was.
I will quickly admit that was not intentional. I think that it's important to have a broad swath of representatives. I just could not find a lobbyist group, I guess you'd say, that would advocate for or against the situation.
Okay, thank you. Representative Pomala.
Yes, thank you so much. The question I had was, what was the impetus for you to feel like that we should be looking towards our waste reduction goals right now for extended producer responsibilities? Just how do you feel at this point? Not how do you feel, but what is your information on our waste reduction abilities now?
My information beyond what our 1990 study was in waste reduction was that speaking with my local municipal board and with the local transfer station. And they are both very deeply concerned about this issue. I imagine very many municipal boards are. China, we no longer have a source for much of our disposables. And there's 2 aspects of this. One is the packaging, and the other is the actual products that we dispose of. And speaking of the packaging, we have mandatory recycling in Marlborough, but once we collect it, it really does not get, there's no place to put it. About 9 bottles on average, say, use soda bottles as an example, about 9 bottles out of 100 actually get recycled. The rest end up in our landfill. And it's just, so the impetus for this, to answer your question, I think would be that it was a local concern of my town.
In the bill, for the study committee, you discussed RSA 149-M with, emphasis on improvement of municipal recycling. What are those goals? What are the goals in that RSA?
I don't have that right in front of me.
Okay.
So.
All right, let me look it up real quick and I'll, let's see here. It looks like the goals, it says here, are by the year 2000 is to achieve a 40% minimum weight diversion of solid waste landfill or incineration on per capita basis. That was in 1999.
Yeah.
Do you have any actual data on from 1999 to, this was in a year. So this is effective 1999 and it looks like the RSA said in a year, we're going to achieve a 40%.
We have fallen far short of that.
Well, I guess
don't
I
have
don't
actual data.
understand that the goal. Do you know the impetus of how that goal was even made? Because I'm not sure anybody could make a 1-year goal of reducing something by 40%. Do you know how this has been taken seriously in any way? RSA 149:M?
Oh, I do not.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative, for the question. Just a point of clarification here too. I just wanted to clarify. I have participated myself in solid waste recycling study committee in the year 2019, where 4 members sat on that committee, and there is currently the solid waste working group that is underway. So I did have some questions with regard to some of the charges within this bill. And I was curious to know about whether or not, starting on line 20 to 22, the charges here talk about the emphasis of improving municipal recycling, solid waste flow, and the reduction of taxpayer costs and the support of transfer stations throughout extended producer responsibility. And while that is certainly germane to this, I'm curious to know if there are additional things that you might include in the charge of something that was solely focused on extended producer responsibility.
Well, my personal opinion is that a project of this magnitude is sufficient to itself. And while I think solid waste reduction group programs need to be part of this, and I think that we need to use every tool that is available to us, I do see this particular bill as something that is attacking a individual, unique situation that we can make progress with. Therefore, I recommend the scope of a study group to be limited to this extended producer responsibility.
Follow-up, if I'm going to recognize myself for a follow-up. So with that, you're really looking at the packaging, the way materials are packaged in the state of New Hampshire, and the reason I ask, the reason I do ask is that extended producer responsibility, generally speaking, has a very unique lens, and it looks at pretty specific portions of how we manage our solid waste.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm not looking at this as a packaging bill, although I think that can have a significant impact. But I also know that we currently have tipping fees on many of our electronic products and the like, tires. There was a bill this past biennium to build in costs of solar panel disposal. I think these are all valid concerns, and while my particular emphasis is on the waste that's being produced, I cannot turn a blind eye to those other very significant factors in our landfills as well. Some are very toxic, in fact, and they do need this attention.
Thank you. And I do notice that there's somebody from the Department of Environmental Services here. So you're welcome to sort of, I'd like to recognize the department for a moment, if that's okay. You're welcome to come sit at this other chair so that you have a microphone. We can sort of be, it's a big room for us. Thank you, Mr. Wimsat. If you wouldn't mind, for the record, just stating your name and the department.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsat. I'm the Service Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Thank you. One of the things that I would like to sort of discuss and hear your thoughts is about the formation of a commission such as this. And as we know, the difference in a commission is obviously that there is generally stakeholder input. And I did notice the original version did not have producer stakeholders involved in the conversation. And we were just briefly commenting that that is probably an important part of the conversation to include, but my thoughts are on the larger sort of scope of this as it relates to the charge that we saw below. Do you feel that there are any redundancies or overlaps in what is going on currently with the solid waste working group?
Well, that's a fair question. If I may, just as a point of clarification before we talk about that, the representative looked online to look at the reduction goal in the statute, and I think things are a little behind on that because there was a reduction goal that was completely changed more recently within the last couple of years, and that's at RSA 149M2. And it basically has been updated, and I'll just, if I may, describe it briefly, to establish a goal to reduce disposal of municipal solid waste and construction and demolition debris by 25% by 2030 and 45% by 2050. So the goal that the representative was reading was an older one that has been supplanted now. So, okay, great. So those are very relevant and current, and I think this particular work session is timely in the sense that we just issued an updated solid waste management plan last Friday, September 30th, which has a lot of language, which basically sets out broad goals, strategies, and actions that we intend to take over the next 10 years to try to, among many things, but really as a focus to try to achieve that reduction goal that's been established, that waste reduction goal. And part of that will certainly be, and you'll see in the text of the plan, our interest in exploring legislation on many things, including extended producer responsibility and other methods of improving diversion, trying to get more, certainly emphasizing getting more infrastructure in the state that's focused on non-disposal options for waste, such as a materials recovery facility for recyclables, more construction demolition debris recycling facilities than we currently have. Compost and other technologies that we really don't have right now, such as anaerobic digestion. We do have some composting facilities in the state for food waste and organic waste, but we need many more. So this is very timely discussion, I think. And certainly during this session, New Hampshire DES didn't necessarily take a position on this bill, but we were tracking it. And but I think that with the publication of the solid waste management plan very recently, the idea of the legislature assembling a commission to look at these issues, and I'll get to your question, I promise, is appropriate, and that perhaps extended producer responsibility, having a commission that focuses on that is helpful, because that's a really big, even though it's one sort of approach, it has very broad potential application for a variety of products, not just packaging, but other materials as well. So I think it in and of itself, it's a worthy issue of study. As far as how that overlaps potentially with the current work of the solid waste working group, I might defer to Representative Ebel, who also chairs the solid waste working group, and I think with her in the room, I might be inclined to allow her to address that question, if that's all right.
Sure, I'd allow that. Thank you, Madam Chair of the Solid Waste Working Group.
Yeah, good morning. For the record, my name is Karen Ebel, and I represent Merrimack District 5, New London, and Newbury, and I am, in fact, the chair of the Solid Waste Working Group. So I think if I understood your question correctly, what you were trying to get at is whether a commission that was established to focus on EPR would be duplicative of work that the Solid Waste Working Group was going to be doing.
it's a challenging question because I really have to go back to the solid waste working group and ask them where they want to focus next. Speaking for myself, I think EPR is way up on the priority scale for analysis. We definitely want to focus on, as they say, the front end of the pipe instead of the back end of the pipe. I was really struck at a conference I attended recently that someone from a recycling nonprofit was talking about how for so long consumers have been expected to be the ones to have to deal with packaging that was produced, and it was sort of their problem. And I think more and more manufacturers should be looked at to try to help the situation with solid waste by decreasing the packaging that they're producing, focusing more on the recyclability of it if it does go through the pipe. So I think we'll be looking at EPR, but from a timing standpoint, I'm not sure exactly when that'll happen. I do have one other comment. I did share the HB 617 Recycling and Solid Waste Study Committee. That was a legislator-only study committee, not a commission. I don't think anybody could say that that was an unsuccessful endeavor. And honestly, everybody who was interested in the issue of solid waste was given ample time to testify, and they followed the situation all the time. So although it's important on the one hand when you have a commission to have various voices on the table, it's not like people can't participate on an ongoing basis. And I thought the way we handled it was really successful. The only other thing I'll say about commissions is that whereas a legislative committee can come together really quickly, if you have a commission that requires a lot of appointments by different people, it can delay the startup time. So that's just consideration.
I appreciate the perspective. Thank you. One of the other things that I was curious about is sort of the, I know that the New Hampshire Municipal Association was named as a stakeholder group here, and I think there might be somebody. Nope, there isn't actually. And so, but to your point, I think I have a question of the impact that extended producer responsibility has on municipalities as well as the consumer. And I think that that relationship of what happens to the refuse at the municipal level is probably also an important aspect to look into. I don't know if you would agree or not.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I have to say, when I first came at this issue in 2019, my overriding concern was the effect of the decision of China not to take a lot of our plastics and mixed paper. And so, I mean, I think the impact of all of this is really, really tough for municipalities. And if they were able to deal with less refuse, I'm sure they would appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding everything we're doing today. We're discussing whether we're going to have we're studying if we're going to have a study commission, right? Just to make sure we understand that I understand that. What I'd like to know is that we have goals on the books of what our goals are, that you all have goals that you're working towards as well on our behalf. The commission is looking at at waste reduction right now, the committee. Do we need a commission on top of that? Or is that something, since as it's been communicated that this is a priority and this is something of DES interest, why can't we have that conversation and put it in the right priority without an additional study commission? Because the only reason I'm asking, it's not to critique anything. It's just that, I mean, like say, for instance, today, we can't get a quorum together because people are, time is time. So isn't this something that can already be discussed, an important issue that can be discussed under our current framework of what we have right now?
So I don't want to speak for the Solid Waste Working Group. I'm a member of the Solid Waste Working Group. That is an august group. It's 20, I think, people that represent all, that does both legislative representation and solid waste industry, environmental groups. So it has a really broad spectrum of representation. They have a lot of work to do. They have a lot of topics. And as Representative Ebel has indicated, EPR is definitely one of the things that is high on the list, I think is what she said. So I don't think it's DES's place to say whether an extra commission or the working group, but from my perspective as a member of the working group, I think it's certainly something that that group could have a very informed discussion on and could help to develop some recommendations. So I think it could certainly work within the context of the Solid Waste Working Group.
And again, all I'm asking really, and I appreciate you answering that, all I'm trying to get at is, do we already have the capability and people in the room that can have this discussion and put it in the right priority? Because even if we have a study commission that handles this, then whatever comes out of that study commission is going right back into the same pipeline that you all are doing for implementation. So it's sort of like the talk can't keep up with the action. You know what I mean? Yes, ma'am.
I actually think that this is going to come up many times over the next term, because the issue of solid waste is really one that I'm pleased to say is getting a lot of attention. And I think people in the legislature are going to have to decide whether they want to have study committees that are going forward while the Solid Waste Working Group is working, while DES is working on its implementation plans. I'm going to be honest, I have somewhat mixed feelings about it, except that the Solid Waste Working Group, we had so many responsibilities anyway. It's a little bit my fault because I wrote the bill, but we have accomplished one, though. We have the long-range plan out. We have a lot of responsibilities, but we gained even more responsibilities when legislation was amended to create study committees instead of going for, meaning for us to study more things. So we're not going to be able to do everything in the year. I mean, I can't say that I think it would be a bad idea for the legislature to just sort of zero in on this issue and talk about it. I mean, I've had another concept. If you didn't want to just go straight to if you didn't want to do a study committee, you could start with a bill and start working in that direction. I think EPR is a really, really important discussion for the state to have, because I feel like it should appeal to all parties, meaning political parties and views of and perspectives, because it's kind of a Yankee tradition that you take responsibility for what you're producing. And I think it would be great to focus at the front end of the pipe. And we can talk to people in Maine and see how all that's going.
If I may, really quickly, and then I will recognize you next. So speaking of Maine, I have taken the time to look at, with good intention, and the extended producer responsibility program that they have. And it looks like parts of it are being implemented currently. It may take almost the better part of 7 to 10 years to fully implement their program. And so what that tells me is that there is a significant amount of material that would need to be covered in the concept of extended producer responsibility to make sure that we are truly getting the full scope of what it may entail. And when I was asking some of those questions, that is to Representative Partial, it is sort of with that in mind and understanding that this is not just necessarily about packaging. It involves many different stakeholders. And to that end, I wanted to make sure that if it went in the way of a commission, that would not be duplicative, but also give folks the appropriate amount of time to sort of look at the situation fully. Sure.
Somebody else first?
No, go.
No. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would also advocate for a commission because this is a very rapidly changing landscape we're dealing with right now. Recently, California who is a very big player, thus came in with their own version of an EPR. And Amazon has recently started putting teeth into their requirement that products being shipped to Germany and to France and some other places carry the registration. I think that there's a lot of moving parts here. And I will be honest, I do not understand all of them. I know this solid waste working group has a much deeper understanding than I do of these various parts, but I think a study commission could address that on a long-term basis and get all the players into one place. And one other thing I would like to add at some point is we have today Bonnie Christie here, and I think she might be able to answer some of your questions on the municipal impact of, well, that's what we're currently doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Representative Comtois. And,
Please let the woman.
oh, sure. Thank you. Representative Partial had suggested that you might have some input on the municipal sort of aspect of things. And so with that, I'll call you up. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bonnie Christie. I'm from Hopkinton, and I am the chair of the Hopkinton Waste Reduction Committee, and I'm also on the joint committee with the town of Webster. We share a transfer station, and we have a overarching committee that runs the operations of the transfer station. And I submitted testimony in January on Representative Partial's Bill 1111. From the perspective of not having an opinion about, well, an opinion that we could really benefit in municipalities from EPR. And I don't have an opinion on what form because I know Maine has their own EPR and I believe Oregon has theirs. I think maybe Colorado passed EPR, and it's pretty individualized by the state. But what we're experiencing in Hopkinton is, I'm sure, is the same in all municipalities. Our waste load is growing and growing. And we do our best with our staff to recycle. We do diversion, recycle, and we're working on composting now. We don't have that in place yet, but we're trying to divert. But even with all our efforts, excuse me, our best efforts, we can't keep up with it. And it's becoming more and more expensive. And until 2021, we paid $72 a ton to dispose of our refuse in the landfill or incinerator. And then it jumped $10 a ton in the first year. And every year it's going up and up and up with our new contract. And we'll be paying about $100 a ton in 2025. So our waste is growing. The cost of disposing of the waste is growing. We're doing the best we can with the staff and the tools we have in place, but we can't manage this on our own. We're going to have to rebuild our entire recycling facility in a couple of years, and we had budgeted $112,000 in the capital improvement plan a couple of years ago. Well, we all know now that there's no way we're going to rebuild that facility with the way costs have changed in 2025 for $112,000. So we are really interested in these top goals from the new solid waste management plan, which has source reduction at the top. It's always been at the top. It just hasn't happened. And we would be very excited and happy to participate in discussions about how that source reduction can happen in the best way for New Hampshire, understanding that we're not advocating duplicating what Maine did or Oregon or any other state, but please help us. We can't do it on our own. And yeah, it's a consumer problem, but it's also a town problem.
I appreciate that perspective. Thank you. Representative Comtois?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Um, Just a couple of observations based on the discussions. One is if we start this commission, I'm assuming it's going to go for probably a decade at least, based on what I'm hearing. Because we're talking, several years. The commission won't probably get started until 2023, late 2023 sometime. And so part of my concern is, and I do sit on another commission, so I'm well aware of how they operate. And basically, the commission looks at everything, but then it's another year before legislation even becomes introduced, if there's anything that needs to be done. So although I'm not opposed to a commission, I do have some mixed feelings about that. That is, that if this is such an important issue that needs to be addressed, say, immediately, sooner rather than later, that the legislative approach might be more viable in getting things done quicker from a legislative perspective. And I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
I would like to hear sort of some thoughts around the time frame that a commission might take, and if Representative Ebel, you're welcome to speak to that again. Though the program itself might take a decade to implement, I am hopeful that a commission would not go for 10 years, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, I have many thoughts. One thing I just want to say is, whether the E&A recommends this for further legislation or not, the solid waste working group will be meeting, I believe, on the 28th, and we're going to be talking about some of the things that we're going to be focusing on. And so if more legislation is introduced in November, and then you start talking about it in January, you're going to have a pretty good idea at that point what we're focusing on. I'm sorry, I can't be better about the timing of all of this, but Representative Comtois is right. I mean, I was deputy speaker a couple of years ago. I know how long appointments take. I will say that commissions just take a lot longer to get going because when you have individuals from all different walks of life, you've got to identify them. And legislative study committees just get going a lot faster, and you can have everybody there. You can request. I mean, people will, believe me, if they're interested, they will be there. And you can, I did this once before actually in the dyslexia context where we kind of created a working group around our legislative study committee. The only other thing I'm going to say is that every study committee or commission that you create on this issue, you're getting DES involved, and DES is already short-staffed, and it's pretty much always the same people that have to be sitting here, that are working on legislation, that are doing the implementation plans, that are, advising the solid waste working group, and then just doing the basic work of running the Solid Waste Bureau. So it's hard. As I say, I had a lot of thoughts, but I don't know if that's helpful or not. But anyway, that's what I would have to say.
No, I appreciate that. Representative Comtois, and then I will.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Would a possibility be is to do like another working group, like underneath the solid waste working group to establish, like take so many people and put it under that to focus on different aspects, as opposed to starting a commission where you could just focus on the EPR side of things?
Thanks for mentioning that. I hadn't actually thought about that, but when we were kind of breaking down how we were going to tackle advising DES on the solid waste plan, we did break down into subcommittees, so that's one way that we could go. So I mean, it's just, I wish I could be more definitive on what the working group is going to do, but we have to meet and we have to discuss this. The other thing is that under the terms of the statute, the working group has to introduce or present an interim report by November 30th. I don't know how detailed that's going to be because the bulk of our work really had to do with helping out with the long-range plan. But we might reflect some of our priorities in that report. So there's a lot of things going on, but of course you have to make your recommendation by November 1st. Good luck.
Representative Homola.
Thank you. The question I had is, in Maine, Oregon, does anybody who knows this, please shout out to it, but did they start with a study commission? Okay. Sure. And the reason I'm wondering is maybe it would be useful to find out who may have started with a study commission, because there's going to be a report from that study commission. I'm just looking at, instead of everybody reinventing the wheel, perhaps there's some really germane data in their study commission report that sort of can answer some of the basic questions that we might be looking at in a commission. So then at that point, maybe the looking at the problem gets a lot smaller, and we could do that within the context that we have, or not. Maybe there's still a need for a study commission, but I'm looking at how do we not reinvent the wheel from process one, look at what somebody else possibly has, and then be able to tailor that.
I did speak with a senator from Maine that sponsored this legislation, and I'm not 100% positive, because this was a conversation quite long ago when I'd have to dig through my notes. I believe they did start with a study commission, however, and it was a long process, which is why she said the sooner we get started here, the sooner we can start actually tackling this problem.
And I
And
guess
I know she'd be open to further conversation.
Sure. And I wondered, is that something that is a viable possibility, is starting with before we ask for a study commission, maybe we start by asking, is there data in somebody else's commission report that basically covers we're talking things outside of New Hampshire here. So some of these answers will all be very universal together that states share. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I totally agree on that. However, I think that the solutions that New Hampshire needs are probably different than the one, maybe not so different than Maine, but definitely different than California and Oregon. I think that we could probably benefit from getting stakeholder interest from the people who are here in New Hampshire. So that's why, I think that looking at other study commissions would be of paramount importance. At the same time, I think we have to ask who's looking at them. And I think a study commission would be the most appropriate venue for that, because then you have all the stakeholders together. That's my personal opinion.
Does anybody think that some of this information, if you start at a point of, like, say, this much knowledge, don't you think at that point then the structures that we have, and again, I'm not trying to debate whether a study commission or not, I'm not trying to throw shade on that, I'm just trying to ask this question. Do you think that if we got a leg up by looking at some of the data that's out there already, that it would give the existing resources that we have, the existing agency and the existing solid waste management group, the ability they need then to call in the New Hampshire stakeholders and get their information? I mean, we could be, instead of starting from a position of down here, would that help us start from a position of middle? Thank you.
So, Madam Chair. Yes, okay.
Absolutely,
Sorry.
thank you.
Sorry. As part of our kind of getting going with the solid waste working group, I actually invited in folks from like the DES counterparts in Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine. And there is a discussion that was recorded with the head of the solid waste group. I think her name is Pamela Clark in Maine, on what they've been doing on EPR, among other things. So that's already there. I'm trying to remember if I asked I wanted to put a link to what Maine had done on our website, on the Waste Working Group website. I don't know if we did. My recollection is that there was a study commission at the legislative level. They made certain recommendations, but I don't know. I thought that what they did was they turned it over kind of to the DES in Maine to make legislative recommendations. I'm looking at the chair. She's nodding. I don't know.
Thank you, Representative. That's correct. And there's a certain amount of post the study commission that did happen in the state of Maine. A lot of what was hashed out was set forth in rulemaking.
Right.
So I am aware that there was a commission in Maine. There are other programs moving forward, and there are other pieces of legislation working through legislatures in Massachusetts and New York, respectively, currently on this subject. So with that, to your point, it is a very, it looks like there are several different ways we can think about how best to move forward with the time given, but at the same point, I do think that this is a very complex issue that would require a dedicated set of eyes and stakeholders involved in the conversation. Now, how we do that and how we arrive at that might be different, whether it's a committee, a piece of legislation, or a commission. That still remains to be seen. And if there is anybody else sitting here, I know there's people watching intently over here, so if you have other thoughts, you're welcome to contribute as well. Director Wimsatt, is there anything else that you have that you would like to sort of communicate with us regarding the ability for the department to be involved in such a commission? Would you feel that the department would have bandwidth to do so?
Thank you. It's a very fair question. And the reality is that every study commission or committee that we either sit on, and in a way it doesn't matter, this particular bill doesn't put DES on the commission. It puts a Waste Management Council member on the commission, but it doesn't really matter because we always have to be there, and whether we sit on the commission or we actually just come and testify and provide information, it is and all of those are valuable and valid and important. But as Representative Ebel indicated, we do get stretched thin sometimes on, particularly when there are multiple commissions. So as I said, I'm not sure it's DES's role to say whether the right way to do this is with a commission or to try to have the Solid Waste Working Group handle it as well. What I will tell you is that, we've got a brand new solid waste management plan that absolutely identifies extended producer responsibility. It's something that we need to explore through legislation. I do think that it's a topic that it isn't, at some level it's sort of obvious. Yeah, if you do that, that's going to help, right? It's going to mean that the producers are going to have some kind of, and it takes different shapes and forms, but the producers will have some kind of responsibility to take pressure off of municipalities, which end up managing a lot of the waste. So in a general sense, yes, it makes sense. So you say, well, why do we need a commission? But the reality is that it differs for different products and materials, and it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts right now. A lot of states, New Hampshire has, in a general sense, not been a leader on extended producer responsibility, although I will correct that with one thing that we were actually significant leaders on going way back to the turn of the millennium. The Interstate Mercury Education and Reduction Clearinghouse, New Hampshire was instrumental in working with the other Northeast states and the Canadian provinces to identify ways to get mercury out of products, mercury added products. And that has been an amazing success story with that. The Interstate Mercury and Education Reduction Clearinghouse, which is known as IMERC, is run currently by the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, which is an association of the 6 New England states and 2 in New York and New Jersey. I sit on their board as a representative for New Hampshire, and NUMOA is a small but mighty organization that actually implements that program, and it provides for using the laws that have been passed across the states, including in New Hampshire, for folks to, producers to identify mercury content in their products and make sure that they're working to get it out. And when they don't, to have collection programs such as for mercury thermostats. So there's a lot of history there, and New Hampshire was a leader on that. In more recent years, other New England states and Northeastern and states across the country have been a lot more active than New Hampshire has on other extended producer responsibility activities. In some respects in New Hampshire, we've really benefited from others being the laboratories for that. And then when it gets a little more mature and it's working pretty well, we try to jump on that. And I think that can happen certainly for EPR. I think there's a lot going on. A lot of states are learning things right now. But at the very least, even if we don't have a particular new product that we impose an extended producer responsibility law for, we should at least be educating both our legislators and the communities and DES on how it works, how it can work. And as we move forward throughout the implementation of our 10-year plan, we would certainly hope and expect that there will be legislation that will provide for extended producer responsibility programs where appropriate for various products. And we think that that is absolutely going to be an important component of our overall attack on this problem of reducing waste.
Yes, Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. One, is it possible for you to send us that updated report that was just done on the waste reduction? Or is there a spot we can find that?
It's on
You
the
mean the solid waste management plan?
Yeah, this-
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's on our website, and we did, I believe it was sent to the chair of your committee by
Okay.
memo, probably with a link, rather than, we're trying not to do as much paper, so it was probably a link, but I'll be happy to, if I can tell you the quickest way to do it is just to go to our website and click on we go to the solid waste page, and there's the link there to that entire report.
Okay.
But
And
we'll make sure that this committee has all that information.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And one other thing, is there an EPR association? You had mentioned about an association about something else. And is there an EPR association that is working together in the New England states on how to go forward with a lot of these issues?
Yes, so I mentioned NUMOA, and then there's also an organization called NERC, or Northeast Recycling Council, which and NUMOA works closely. We have an agreement to work closely on these kinds of issues. As a matter of fact, this is one of the issues we're working on with them. And there's also and the name is going to escape me at the moment. It's a broader association that includes a lot of industry groups. And Scott Castle, do you know the name? No, it's actually focused specifically on producer responsibility. I just can't remember the name of it. So the answer is yes, there are a few organizations in that category. And I'll also note, just because I think it's relevant, obviously PFAS is something that is on the minds of a lot of people right now. And recently I attended in September our quarterly board meeting for NUMOA. And the board at that meeting agreed to authorize NUMOA and NUMOA staff to begin working on a model legislation for PFAS EPR. And so that's something that, it's going to take some time, but that's the kind of thing that really can be helpful. One of the problems that is a problem for states, because if every state develops a somewhat unique EPR law for a particular material, and then they have to go and implement that, it can be pretty, just in terms of on the agency, when it comes time to launch something like that, it can have an impact. You need staff to do that. It can be a lot of work up front to set up something like that. And one of the things that has happened over the years, and it's true with that Mercury example I gave you, is that when the Northeast states agree on model legislation that's going to be implemented across the region, or in some cases across the country, then you can start to get sort of economies of scale. You don't have to, each state doesn't have to invent their own program. And a lot of these EPR programs require some kind of notification and record keeping that can be very costly and time consuming for individual states. And one of the things that is likely to happen, they're going to look at models such as, there's another organization, I hate to keep hitting you with acronyms, but called IC2, which is the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse. And that is a national organization. It doesn't have full membership across the states, but has a number of Northeast states and states across the country that have extended producer responsibility and toxics and packaging laws associated with particular contaminants in packaging or in products. And the idea is that this model legislation that NUMOA will work on, along with the Northeast Recycling Council, that we're going to be working in tandem with them, will actually try to be modeled after what we did with the Mercury program. And it would ideally set up a system where the IC2, the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse, which has a lot of infrastructure for collecting information and receiving reports from manufacturers, that could set up, that I can envision, and what we're expecting is that legislation would set up a system where if New Hampshire and other states adopt a law that provides for PFAS in packaging or PFAS in products, extended producer responsibility, all the manufacturers could report directly to the IC2 group, and they would cover their reporting requirements for all the states that were members, instead of having to report to each individual state and having to develop a separate reporting format. So instead of having this mosaic of laws that become very difficult for industry and business to comply with, which also makes it hard to pass those laws in a legislature, you have a system that's much more attractive. If you talk to any member of industry that's facing some kind of a law that will require them to either get something out of their product or report about it, they'll always tell you the first and foremost thing they're most concerned about is having a 50-state mosaic of laws they have to comply with. And if they've got something that's uniform across at least a region or the nation, it's much more attractive. It's much easier to get industry on board with that. And then it's easier to pass those laws and get them implemented. And once you do pass them, it's much easier on the individual states for implementation, because they're not all individually standing up these individual infrastructures for managing the reporting and the regulation.
Just one more question, and I think we're kind of to a place where I think that we might be able to have some discussions among ourselves. So go ahead.
I was just going to comment, based off what you're saying, that's kind of to the point where I was trying to go with. If we do have some things to look at in Maine right now, doesn't that give us a leg up on a lot of our research into this?
Absolutely. I will say that anything that New Hampshire DES has ever done successfully when it comes to a new initiative, we've always learned a lot from other states that have, unless we're the first ones, there's almost always somebody who's done what you're trying to do. We always go to that, and we're not shy about stealing good ideas.
So with that, I think that we have, I think you sort of helped clarify some things for me with the, with mentioning NUMOA and IC2. I think that there are a broad range of scenarios that need to be looked at with regard to EPR, and I think that it is important that we get it right. We're hearing from many stakeholders who are here today, as well as in the previous with Representative Parshall's initial presentation of the bill to our committee, that perhaps we need to continue to have this conversation. And though we can't make a recommendation today because there is not a quorum, I would like to schedule, we have a deadline for the committee. I know we're meeting again October 25th as a full committee. So I can certainly schedule something between now and then to make a recommendation to the full committee, and I would like to do that. I think it's important that we have that opportunity to, through the appropriate venue, do that. So there will be no recommendation made today. And with that, I thank you for your time and your attention. And I think that we can all agree that there's a lot to still discuss around the extended producer responsibility. So with that, I will close the meeting out. It's 11:30 in the morning. Thank you.